Welcome everyone to the third interview organized by Reopen. Today's guest is Albena Azmanova, who is an associate professor of the University of Kent, and we're going to be talking about some of her concepts and of course about Central and Eastern Europe issues in relation to the current crisis of Europe. Welcome, Albena.
Very happy to be here.
We're very happy to have you. Now, before I start asking questions, I would like to somehow set the tone of the debate so that we had everything kind of wrapped up in a perspective. Today, we're going to be mainly focusing on the recent events in East Central Europe. Now, these events have been the subject of extensive academic research and debates, as well as politicians, practitioners, political commentators. They have all been discussing the recent events. Now, because there have been so much research and publication on this, at the same time, we are missing some links that have not been really made clear. And our guest, Albena, today is precisely the scholar that might help us to kind of go beyond the narrow understanding and the narrow spectrum of the current academic debates. This tension between Eastern Central Europe and the Western Europe is most visibly manifested in the rule of law disputes between Poland and Hungary and the European institutions. My question to you would be, traditional alternative projects to the current, say, liberal capitalist status quo, do not seem to provide enough answers. Right? And in your book, you have offered the notion of precarity capitalism, which I believe might help us to understand the terms of the debate a bit more, a bit better. So how does this concept actually help us to understand the current situation within the European Union? And do you think that this concept might help us to understand better the tension between East and West of the European Union?
Thank you. That's a very interesting perspective to rethink my diagnosis, because it's just a diagnosis, that capitalism over the past 20 years, since the turn of the century, and while we have been discussing the crisis of capitalism, actually insidiously, neoliberal capitalism transformed itself into another form, which I call precarity capitalism, and which is marked by the massification of economic and social fragility. It's its distinctive feature. Now, how does it explain what's going on in in Europe? Two developments are worth our notice. The one is the development of autocracy, the erosion of the rule of law. What's now the term is rule of law backsliding. But not only in Hungary and Poland, the most visible cases, certainly in Bulgaria, in Romania, but also in the West. So we have, autocratic laws in France. We have attack on the freedom of the press in Austria. Look what's happening in Spain with the way the governments have been reacting to the turmoils in Catalonia. So this is certainly not complying to the idea of liberal democracy as we have it. So that's one of these developments, the erosion of the rule of law and the rise of autocratic type of rule everywhere in Europe, I would say. The second is that the West, the old democracies of Europe, lost not only just their interest in the East, but their affection for us. Eastern enlargement of the European Union was based on some sort of a complicity, positive attitude, desire to help us out and to shoulder the burden of the transition, at least financially. Now, this kind of solidarity is eroding very fast. And that was very clear during the mobilization for the the vote for the European Constitution in 2005, where both the left and the right in Parliament in France raised the ghost of the Polish plumber. So the Eastern Europeans coming to get their jobs. So there are these nefarious negative tendencies. And if we dig deep enough, we would see that a lot of that fear, hostility, is triggered by what I describe in my book, Capitalism on Edge, with the term the massification of precarity. So precarity is the politically engineered disempowerment of people. The triggers of that are economic and political. So the economic trigger is the intensified competition for profit in the global economy. All of our societies, and starting with the European Union, their top priority is to secure the competitiveness of the European economy, of the national economies in the global market. And as a result of that, they have been cutting social insurance, cutting employment provision, just disempowering people economically. Now, the mechanism is that once people feel precarious, that triggers instinct or the search for stability. And the shortcut is to elect, people with the iron fist to provide a fast security. So economic precarity invites political autocracy. But political autocracy deepens the precarity of people because it disempowers them further. However, rather than, it's a very facile, very easy criticism to countries, to embrace immigration, be more liberal, more tolerant. You have to provide first the conditions so that people feel secure in their livelihoods. Rather than just moralize, what naughty citizens they have become.
So precarity is a very interesting notion that helps us to actually look at the situation at hand from a very different perspective. It is also interesting that in your book you raise again another term which we normally understand in a very kind of a casual manner, and that is inequality, which no longer plays the role in our discourse. And you wish to replace inequality with another notion of yours, that is the distribution of risk and opportunity. Now, this is a very interesting turn, and this understanding that you bring to the fore is also quite closely related to the crisis of the left. That the left no longer is able to play a certain role in the public debates, and it had embraced the neoliberal mindset to such an extent that only every social protest that comes from these, say, mainstream left-wing notions stays firmly embedded within the existing system. So does it even, and you call this process the paradox of emancipation. So it means that there is not really a way out of this predicament if we keep using the old notions of left and right and inequality. If we take all this into account, I believe that this sheds a completely different perspective on the current situation in Europe, which the tension between the East and the West, we can also say that the tension between the center and the periphery becomes something else. It's no longer democracy versus the rule of law, but the situation from your perspective looks a bit different. What do you make out of this?
Well, first, let's start with the answers that the left has been giving. First, the left was very complicit with the neoliberal agenda. They had accepted the free market and open border policies. Then the economic crisis hit, and the left changed its discourse. It became all about inequality. So it seems that there's a radical shift, right? However, if you look at surveys, people do not care about inequality. People care about the fact that they cannot pay their bills, they're unsure about their health care, about the education of their children. So the grievances are about this general instability, but the left is giving this easy answer. It's inequality. And so actually, rather than going through the statistics of inequality, because surely they're there. I mean, I'm not saying that there is no inequality, and it is a problem. But the thing is that pundits, journalists and academics and all kind of specialists, they're in the habit to use this language of inequality. Actually, that masks a different grievance. It's very easy to talk about inequality because you can measure it. You can put your finger and say, this is what's happening, this is why people are angry. But if you actually study the people's grievances, they all go back to this anxiety that our livelihoods are so unstable that we cannot even think ahead. Now, of course, in context of precarity, of deep insecurity, people become more conservative, even reactionary, because they are longing for quick stabilization. So the trouble of the left is that it is giving an answer to a question nobody asked. So they really have to shift, to make the shift very promptly. The problem is that stability has always been an idea of the right. So the difficulty of the left is to reconfigure its analysis and its answers to provide a left type of answer to the demand for security. So while the right is providing security through law and order techniques, the left should be, providing for economic and social stability. But fighting inequality, again, it's not sufficient, because imagine we can become completely equal. Remember, our societies in Eastern Europe were more or less equal, but we were precarious. We were not very solidaristic. So you can have an equal society that is even rather affluent, but can be very precarious if we do not have sufficient funds to pay for the essentials of healthcare. And the COVID pandemic actually displayed this, that our affluent, scientifically advanced societies didn't know how to handle a sanitary crisis triggered by a virus that was neither a pathogen, neither too unknown. We knew about the corona family of pathogens, nor too deadly. So it was not such a huge challenge, but our societies didn't have the capacity and the know-how to handle crises because they had become so precarious.
There's another topic that relates to what we perceive traditionally as a leftist language, and it's the question of values, right? And it's not just it used to be a critique from the left. We saw a critique of values, and we have also seen this shift in the language of the European project. That if you look back at the history of accession, and the last 30 years, the European Union was using a certain language, right? A language of, fiscal language or institutional language. And recently we have seen a certain shift that the European Union started talking about values, the values of the community, the values of the European Union. And these values are supposed to justify certain, say, practices or certain interventions or certain policies. But at the same time, if you look at the Central and Eastern European governments, which are normally characterized as populist or illiberal, they too speak of values, and these values become a point of resistance which these leaders or parties or countries are trying to put up in the exchange with the core of the European Union. So what do you make of this shift in the debate, that suddenly culture has become a point of conflict?
It's true that the wars over economic policy are replaced by culture wars. This is a symptom. I think we should take it as a symptom of what's and ask the question, what is actually triggering this? And I think what is triggering is that the economic instability that is to a great extent generated by open borders, rush for global markets, no political force is really ready to address it. So they're coming with the shortcuts of like, let's look at culture, let's look at values, let's do something about that, because it is easier done than invest funds in robust social and economic protection. So for me, this is the symptom. Often. Within the culture wars, now what happens is, okay, we have the troubles with the rule of law. And then the answer is more democracy. Now, more democracy has become the answer to everything. Like, it's the panacea of everything. But this, in my mind, this is a sign of the new liberal mentality. Because you offload the responsibility down to citizens, in the name of democracy, and tell them, you fix it. So the political elites wash their hands of the responsibility, to make a real effort to stabilize our lives, and say, through democratic means, with more inclusion, more deliberation, especially deliberation, we are going to sort it out. Now, this is both unfair to democracy. You cannot burden people to take more responsibility that they can carry. Because currently we're in a situation where people have all the responsibility without the power, and governments have all the power without the responsibility. So you cannot say, well, your existence is dependent on holding a job or 3 jobs in a polluting industry, but you should vote for the Green Deal, right? It is simply neither realistic nor fair. This is pseudo-democracy. That is why, much as we embrace the values of democracy, but we shouldn't rush to burden democracy with, the whole responsibility for decent politics.
So, if what I understand from what you're saying, if the market has lost the role of this basic ideological differentiator between the left and the right, we can conclude that the division has been erased from mainstream politics, as you put forward in your work. Now, if we look at the populist movements, again, it is difficult to pin them down once we start getting rid of the old divisions and old terminology. Now, we cannot describe these movements as left or as right. We can also not describe them with reference to capital versus labor divide. So if it would mean to me that the logic of neoliberalism has been accepted across the board. So what is the meaning of populism today? What is this movement? It's not surely not just, undemocratic peoples of Eastern Europe revolting against the center. There has to be more. So in your understanding, how would you describe this populist movement? Should we get rid of the label populist, illiberal? What should we do?
Populism is a lazy term. It's very misleading, and it is intellectually lazy because it prevents us from looking at the thing and acknowledging that the anti-establishment movements that started this phenomena, they do not stop simply with saying, well, it's us the people versus the establishment. What typically populism is marked by is what Max Weber called negative politics. So reactive politics without readiness to engage with rule, without a serious substantive platform. So this kind of negative politics. But that's not what we see. We see that these are parties that come with a very articulate platform that has 4 elements. So the fight against economic insecurity, political disorder with all the scandals of mismanagement, corruption, nepotism that we have seen. So quest for political order, concerns with cultural estrangement, and then physical insecurity. So we have 4 elements of a proper political agenda. This is the anti-precarity agenda. So we have also parties that are engaging with rule. So it's not just the negative politics. So the term populism for me doesn't work anymore. We have to admit that they are representing a very important public demand for some things to be done, and then political parties need to react to that public demand. Yes, I don't use the term populism, and actually I actively try to put an end to the use of this lazy term.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful answers, and thank you very much for coming to our program.
It's been a pleasure.